All right, we are incredibly lucky to welcome on to Ed's Not Dead, Mr. Troy Boddy. Guys, you know Troy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Troy is currently the Director of Equity Initiatives in the Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. Troy began his career as a reading teacher, staff development teacher, and assistant principal, and he was also an elementary school principal prior to his current role as director. The purpose of his job is to support and collaborate with schools to address equity and cultural competence in the 17th largest school district in the United States. Troy leads a team that helps schools and offices address structural barriers that enable the racial achievement gap to persist. So once again, we are psyched to have Troy on the show. Troy, Mr. Siddons is going to kick us off with the first question. Go ahead, Casey.
In your position, you probably go in and out of schools all the time. What are three or so look-fors that you initially key in on when you walk into a school that says that this school has basically high expectations for all kids?
So I look for a school who talks about kids' potential as opposed to deficits and what all the things they don't have that the school expects them to have. And the truth is, all kids bring background knowledge and their identities to school. It's just that we're not organized necessarily to appreciate
Amen.
What everybody brings.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is they hold not only the kids to high expectations, but the staff holds themselves to high expectations. But the really skillful teacher are those teachers who state, I have high expectations. I'm going to show you how to get there.
It's funny, you brought up a couple points that I just want to kind of highlight. So about kids having the potential and talking about the potential that kids have and not the deficits. So a couple of weeks ago, we spoke with Curtis Linton, and that was definitely one of the points that he brought up and really hammered home for me at least was equity is inherently positive, and it's not a deficit thinking. It's not a negative way of thinking of what kids don't have. It's all about what they do have. So on that sort of same tip, and I want you to kind of zoom out here. So Curtis Linton also talked about, and this was his own just personal experience. He called it his identity crisis, I believe, or his crisis of faith, perhaps.
Right.
Was that he's seen a lot of individual schools do the work in terms of not just the equity work, but in achieving equitable outcomes. And he was able to point out to some small school systems, that are like your one high school type feeder systems, that are also doing great work with equitable outcomes. But he's having trouble finding large school systems where they can and they have created the equitable outcomes. And not that they're not doing the work, not that they're not trying, but just the end result and the outcomes have not gotten there yet. So amongst all that rambling, here's the question. So
I'm still following you, though.
Hey, you said so I was like, yeah, he's with me. So how does an entire system of schools move their practice toward more equitable outcomes? So how do you go from this is the idea, this is the work, to the end result that we're all striving for?
Part of this work, I was explaining to my staff the other week. So a lot of times we talk about having the end in mind. And we create these learning progressions that kind of represent a straight line. And so if we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, we'll get to whatever the end in mind was. In this case, equitable outcomes for kids. Mm-hmm. But equity doesn't work like that. So everybody starts at a different place. So if we break it down to, I like to break the work down in a couple different levels. So you got your personal work. So what are the opportunities that, a system is creating for people to develop their equity literacy, to become aware or to become woke? Some schools are still talking about multiculturalism, which is like so 1970s.
Hey, Mr. Boddy, you and I taught in multicultural schools. That was our thing, right, in the 90s?
Exactly.
All right.
And hold on. Let me take you off on a tangent because you brought up something, and I know, and I apologize, but all right. So that's part of the deal that I feel like I run into, and I might have asked this to Curtis Linton too. I don't know, but So doing the deep work and the deep reflections versus the lip service of what you think I want to hear. Like, how do you tell the difference?
There's this concept of discourse 1 and discourse 2. So in discourse 1, we maintain the status quo. We complain about time. We blame other people for whatever the problem is. We come up with really technical and quick solutions. What equity requires us to do is to bring in multiple perspectives, because there are a lot of perspectives that, when we design and develop schools and organize schools and think about, that are missing from the table. What do we need to create to fill this space that will create better outcomes for kids and their families? What is it that we're missing? So being self-reflective. So part of it is asking the right questions. Again, this work is about student outcomes and their well-being.
Yep.
And so, again, we're not doing this just to feel good. And we have a lot of equity warriors who are, down for the cause. But then the teacher next door is not on board. So it's not only us growing as individuals, but then we got to take what we know. What we know is the right work to do, the work that's going to really make a difference. And we got to do it together.
All right, so that leads us to our next question, and this is our last big question, Troy, before we hit you with the rapid fire round and put you on the hot seat. So I know that you probably get requests to work with schools, and I'm going to give you a scenario here. A school with a population of kids of color that are the minority in the school. And an overall, let's say, high SES population, and a staff that largely reflects the dominant culture. So you get a call from a principal who needs to know where they begin with equity work, especially when he or she knows that many teachers on the staff are going to do what I call identify out, or will be largely passive in the process. What do you say to that principal about where to begin?
The first thing I want you to do is I want you to think about what would it look like in your school when you have achieved equitable outcomes for kids. Mm-hmm. And then I want you to walk back. So what's that work that needs to be done? Mm-hmm. And so it's that vision. It's putting processes in place to help people move toward that goal you're trying to achieve. And you need to be clear about what you're trying to achieve. And you can't do everything at once, because that's the other thing people want to do. They just want to do it all at once. It's not going to happen that way. But being really strategic about where you enter and how you push. And eventually those beliefs will fall into place.
Thank you. Okay, rapid fire round. Are you starting us off, Casey?
I am.
Okay. All right, Troy, you ready?
So just to clarify, we have not shown. I don't think we sent these to Troy.
We did not.
Right?
We did not.
All right. So we're gonna put some ridiculous statements out there as fact, and then you're gonna have like 20 to 30 seconds to refute them immediately.
Should, like on the late night talk show, should we give Troy one pass where he gets to say I don't want to answer that one?
You can have one pass.
Okay, you got one pass.
We came up with this. We like to be contrarian. We like to have arguments with each other and challenge each other. So these are statements that either we've heard or something similar to what we've heard in schools. And when you respond, sometimes it's good to respond with a question. When you ask people, where are you coming from with that? So maybe if you've heard it before, you come up with the question or something you'd say as quickly as you can. So the first, are you ready for the first one?
Let's do it.
Okay, just again, this is not what we were saying. This is not what we believe.
Yeah, just for the record, we don't believe any of
for
these
the
things.
Listeners too.
Okay, all right.
First one: when you don't allow kids to fail, you don't teach them responsibility.
Or the only way to teach kids responsibility is to let them fail, I guess would be the other way.
Yeah, you reversed it.
Okay, yeah, that's better. I had to think about that the first way you phrased it. Part of being responsible, is making mistakes and figuring out how to grow from that. So I want you to just think about something that, that you learned how to do, that was difficult for you. Were you allowed to fail? When was the first time you recognized, that you didn't do something well, and how did you deal with
I
that?
like that.
Oh, that's good. Troy, we are raising a generation of students who don't know how to work hard because they are allowed to make up work until they get it right.
So, in your role as an educator, whose responsibility is it to make sure that kids get it? Because I'm not, I'm just wondering, we want, as a teacher, most teachers take pride in making sure, and reflecting on how their kids have grown by the end of the year. So, don't you want your kids to demonstrate that they understood all that, effort you put into teaching this lesson or this concept? Don't you want them to leave understanding it?
That was skillful, Troy.
Awesome.
It
was so good we have one more.
I actually wanted to. I'm pushing to have one more. So here we go. So Troy, I'm colorblind. I treat all my students the same regardless of their race. I don't care what color they are. If they're green, brown, yellow, blue, it doesn't matter to me.
Okay. So a couple things.
Okay.
So, do you see the difference between gender in your classroom?
Ooh, okay, that's a tough one. All right, go ahead.
Do you see me? It's standing in front of you. I'm obviously, if I were standing in front of you, you'd obviously see that I'm a black man. So for you not to see that takes out part of who I am. It strips me of my identity. I'm not just some blank slate.
Wow.
This black skin that I'm in has, meaning for me. And there's a story behind this and experiences that I've had because of the skin I'm in that you might learn from.
Powerful.
Yeah. All right, Troy. Before we sign off, I just want to ask you, for our listeners, if you had to recommend anything for them to watch or read that has moved you in any way recently or over the last couple of years, what would you suggest for our listeners that they should check into?
13 on Netflix.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we think about, again, that whole idea of opportunity and access, and really how the system sometimes is set up against some of us and work for us. Harvest of Empire is this great movie that really talks about the Latino experience in the United States. It's really powerful, with all the talk about DACA and immigration. Most of the story, the first time I saw it, I was just angry because no one ever taught me any of this.
Wow.
Okay, that's great. All right, Troy. Well, on behalf of Peter and Casey, right, boys?
Thank you.
Thanks.
This has been amazing. We're really appreciative that you agreed to come on to Ed's Not Dead as a guest, and we're going to get you back on the show in the future. Okay.
Absolutely, I'm here.
All right. Thanks, Troy. Have a good one.
All right, thank you, guys.
Take care.
That was a really awesome interview. I'm so glad he was able to join us.
That was an awesome interview. So one of the things that really jumped out at me that I had never thought of before is the concept of equity or fostering equity, developing equity in schools as a non-linear process.
Yeah.
That the journey is going
fits and starts.
Yeah, and that you're gonna hop all over the place. It's not going to go from point A to point Z, and that naturally, I think that says to me that at times you're probably going to get lost in the process, and that it's you're going to have to find your bearings at times as a staff, as a leader of equity in a school. So that really hit home to me.
I also appreciate it, and I want to know more about how do you go on the journey, if you will, of equity. If you're feeling alone, I guess when you talked about being if you're a teacher who's an excellent teacher and you have those equitable outcomes in your class and you have a safe space for kids to learn, but yet you may be surrounded by teachers, or maybe just one teacher next door to you who is actively creates a toxic environment, or maybe just a mediocre environment. That troubles me because I think that it's something that we don't focus on enough.
All right. Whose responsibility is that?
I think it's on. I think it's on the teachers.
Are you your brother's keeper?
Well, no, I think we need to stand up and call out people when we feel like things are not in the right. Yeah. And teachers, you can't just go and tell your administrator that something's going wrong. Teachers need to call out other teachers, whether it's with gender stuff or equity issues in the school. It needs to be called out by their peers.
Right. And it's not just calling out; it's modeling for them. It's
trying
to support them.
It's not the blame game, but
trying to show them other ways to do things.
But if you're in the teacher's lounge and things are being said that are clearly inappropriate, it needs to be called out. It's not an easy thing to do.
You tell them to shut up and embarrass them publicly, right?
You shame them in front of all their friends.
Exactly. I know. I'm just kidding.
Shame is powerful.
What'd you get, Mr. Krabs?
The bit he talked about, staff holding themselves to high expectations. So it's not just saying, "Oh, I have high expectations for myself and for my kids," and but that you show kids how to get there too. And that high expectations isn't, well, I taught it, nice job, well done. That when they don't get it, that you show them in I mean, it sounds stupid, but you teach them. And that they're learning it or not learning it. Yeah, there's a million other factors involved. It's a human game, but it's still your job to hold yourself to that standard of I'm gonna keep at it until they get it. I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try that. And really be persistent about working with kids until they get it, whatever that it is.
What else? Anything else? I mean, it was an amazing interview.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to him. It's good stuff.
We could have talked to him all night. All right, well, we're going to get Troy, Mr. Boddy, back on the show as we continue our equity series in the future. Once again, thanks to Troy Boddy for joining Ed's Not Dead.